Hello everyone, hope you're having a great day. Today we're diving into a tense turning point. James finds a secret internal document signed by Mr. Huan, then sends one calm email that makes the pressure shift instantly. But here's the hook. If James stands up today, will Nai be safe tomorrow? Or will Mr. Huan strike even harder? The apartment feels smaller when the world starts squeezing from the outside. Not because the walls moved, because the air did. Diep stands by the window with her phone in both hands, eyes locked on the same banking screen she's checked all morning. Under review. 2 words that sound harmless, until you realize they can starve you without ever sounding like a threat. Across the room, James sits at the dining table with his laptop open, but he isn't working. He's listening. Not to sound, he's listening to timing, to patterns, to the way pressure arrives in layers whenever Mr. Huan decides someone needs a lesson. Nai is on the rug with crayons, coloring inside the lines like the world is still simple. Every few minutes she looks up, reading the room the way children do when adults are trying too hard to act normal. Diep's voice stays soft. If we call the partner again, they'll repeat the same line. James nods once, jaw tight. That's the point. He wants us to beg in circles. Diep swallows. And if we don't? James' eyes drift to Nai, small shoulders hunched over crayons, lips pressed in concentration. She should be thinking about colors, not sponsorship re-verification. He answers quietly, like he's choosing each word as carefully as a lockpick. Then we stop playing defense. Diep turns. How? James closes his laptop slowly, like he's ending one chapter. I'm going to find what he used. Diep frowns. A lawyer? James shakes his head. Not yet. Diep takes a step closer, voice dropping. James, you're exhausted, and he has systems. James' expression stays calm, but there's something new under it. Clarity. He has systems, so I'm going to look for where the system bends. Diep's mouth tightens. What if he finds out you're digging? He already assumes I'm helpless, James says, eyes flicking toward Nai's room. That's why I have to move before he thinks I can. That night, after Ni falls asleep, the apartment turns into a quiet war room. James sits at the table with his laptop and a small flash drive. John had helped him compile a list. Old colleagues, quiet assistants, compliance people, anyone who had seen Mr. Huan's exceptions up close. James doesn't write threats. He writes questions. I need to understand what's happening. If you can help, I won't forget it. He sends them one by one, then leans back and exhales like he's been holding his breath for days. Diep watches from the kitchen doorway, arms folded tight over her chest. She looks like she wants to stop him, to pull him back before the rope tightens again. But she doesn't, because she also knows doing nothing isn't safety. It's surrender with better manners. James glances up. You okay? Diep's laugh is small, brittle. No. James nods like he expected that answer. Me neither. The next morning, James takes Nai to the park early. Not for fun, not for routine. For space. He wants Diep to have the apartment to herself for a few hours so she can call the school, check the bank again, and breathe without feeling like adult fear is spilling into Nai's childhood. At the park, Nai swings slowly, her feet pushing the air. James stands behind her, hands steady on the chains, eyes scanning the corners out of habit. Uncle James? Nai asks. Yes, sweetheart? Are you mad? James pauses. Why do you think that? Nai shrugs, but her voice drops anyway. You're quiet, and Mommy is quiet. When people are quiet, it's because something is wrong. James swallows and crouches beside her swing so they're eye level. His voice stays gentle but honest. Something is wrong, but not because of you. Ni blinks hard. Is it because of Grandpa Huan? James' chest tightens. Children hear everything. There are grown-up problems, James says carefully, and Grandpa Juan is involved. Nee looks down at her shoes. Can he make me disappear again? For a second, James feels his stomach drop. He doesn't show it. He takes her hand. Listen to me. No one is taking you away again. Not while I'm here. Nee searches his face like she's looking for proof. James doesn't give her speech. He gives her steadiness. Calm eyes, steady hand, solid presence. Nye nods slowly. Okay. And in that quiet, okay, James feels something settle inside him. Not courage, responsibility. When they return home, Diep is at the table with her phone and a notebook. She looks up, eyes tired. School still says waiting. James sets down Nye's water bottle. Partner still says compliance review. Diep exhales sharply. So nothing. James' phone buzzes. He checks it once, then his expression shifts. Controlled, but alert. He turns the screen toward Diep. I found something. It's internal. Signed. Check your email. Diep's throat tightens. Someone answered. James' jaw tightens too. Someone who wants to stay invisible. Is it safe? Diep whispers. Nothing is safe, James replies. But this is real. They wait until Nye is watching cartoons with headphones, then sit at the table together. James opens his email. A file attachment appears. An internal document, stamped and formatted like procedure. Dense. Official. The kind of paper people hide behind when they want to pretend they're innocent. James scrolls slowly, then stops. There's a signature line, Mr. Juan, and below it, small but unmistakable, a note in the margin, procedure outside of established rules. Diep leans in, eyes narrowing. What does that mean? James' voice is quiet. It means he authorized something that wasn't supposed to happen. Diep's fingers grip the edge of the table. About the account? About the contract? James rereads the coded language. It isn't written like a confession, it's written like permission. One powerful man instructing the system to bend. Diep whispers. So, this is him. James nods once. This is a fingerprint. Diep's eyes flicker between relief and fear. How are you going to use it? James doesn't answer immediately. He saves it in 3 places without speaking. A folder, a flash drive, a cloud backup. Diep watches him. You're not going to sue him. Not now? Why not? This is proof. James finally looks up, calm but tired, like he's carrying 2 wars at once. It's not time yet, he says softly, but he doesn't get to be the only one holding secrets anymore. Diep's voice trembles. So, what do you do now? James leans back. I remind him I'm awake. He doesn't draft a long message. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't accuse. He writes 1 email, clean, simple, and terrifying in its restraint. To Mr. Juan. Subject, blank. I've started to protect myself. You should stop here. Diep watches him hover over the send button. James, if I don't draw a line now, James says, he'll keep moving the line forever. And if this makes him worse? James inhales slowly. Then at least he'll be worse with his eyes open. He presses send. The email leaves like a stone dropped into deep water. No splash, just a ripple, traveling where it needs to go. Across the city, Mr. Juan reads it alone. He doesn't slam his desk. He doesn't raise his voice. He stares at the sentence as if it's written in a language his son has never spoken before. I've started to protect myself. That isn't rebellion. It's a declaration. Mr. Juan reaches for his phone. He doesn't call James. He calls his assistant. Reverse the pressure, Mr. Juan says quietly. Not all of it. Just enough. enough to show he heard, enough to remind James who still controls the valves, enough to keep the game alive. Because Mr. Huan doesn't want peace. He wants submission. Back at the apartment, James sets his phone down and waits. Not because he expects an apology, because he expects a reaction. Diep stands by the counter, arms folded tight. Do you think he'll respond? James' eyes are on the screen. He has to. He can't let me believe I have power. A minute passes. Then James' phone buzzes. A banking notification appears. An account has been reopened. Diep's breath catches. Then another notification. A suspended contract has been withdrawn and canceled. Diep stares. Canceled? Not restored? James' gaze sharpens. He's making a point. Diep whispers, understanding too fast. He reopened the account, but he killed the contract. Diep's mind races through numbers. Rent, groceries, the schools, waiting, and the quiet truth that a reopened account doesn't mean money is coming in. A canceled contract is a door bolted from the outside. Mr. Huan is showing them he can loosen one hand while tightening the other, forcing gratitude and panic to live in the same breath. James nods once. He's saying, I can release you, I can cut you, both whenever I choose. Diep's hands tremble. So he received your email. James' voice is quiet. He received it. Silence fills the room. Diep sinks into the chair, eyes glossy. Aren't you afraid he'll take stronger action? James turns his head toward Nai's room. She's humming to herself, safe in her small world for now. Then he speaks slowly, like he's anchoring the words so fear can't steal them later. I'm afraid, James says. Diep nods because that honesty hurts, but it steadies her. James continues, voice firm. But if I don't stand up today, Nai will be a hostage forever tomorrow. Diep flinches. Don't say hostage. That's what it is, James says quietly. A child's life used as a lever. Diep lowers her head. I hate that you're right. James leans forward, voice low. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to change the rules. Diep looks up. And can you? James inhales once. For the first time, yes. That afternoon, James takes Nai with him to buy groceries. Small, normal things. Apples, rice, milk. But he keeps her close. His hand stays near her shoulder in the parking lot. His eyes keep moving. Not because he expects daylight to become violent, because he refuses to give fear a gap. Nai clutches the basket like she's helping. Uncle James. Are we going home forever? James crouches beside her. We're going home for today. Nee nods, then whispers, I like when you don't look scared. James pauses. Sometimes I am scared. But you don't show it, Nai says, frowning. James smiles faintly. Because you deserve to feel safe. Nai studies his face for a long second, then nods like she accepts that answer as a rule of the world. Diep watches and feels it, clear and sharp. This is James becoming what his father never was. Not a man who controls, a man who protects. That night, after Nai sleeps, Diep and James sit at the table again. The internal document is printed now, stored, duplicated. The email is sent. The account is reopened. The contract is dead. They aren't free, but they aren't helpless. Diep whispers, So what now? James looks at the folder, then up at her. Now we prepare for the long game. Diep's voice is quiet. And if he escalates? James' expression doesn't soften. It steadies. Then he escalates against someone who isn't bowing. Diep's eyes shimmer. You really think you're equal to him now? James exhales. Not equal in resources. A beat. But equal in awareness, he says. Equal in willingness. He's used to one-sided games. He's used to people blinking first. Diep's voice barely rises. And you won't blink? James glances toward Nye's door. I can't. Diep's chest tightens. What if you pay the price? Then I pay it, James says. And if I pay it? Diep asks, voice breaking. James reaches across and takes her hand, firm, warm, real. Then we pay it together. Silence settles, thick with the kind of love that isn't decoration. It's a choice under pressure, a choice with consequences. Diep breathes in, slow. So, who pays first? James' eyes darken. Maybe us, he says quietly. A beat. Maybe him. And somewhere out there, Mr. Juan is still calculating, still convinced time belongs to him. But for the first time, the game isn't one-sided. For the first time, James isn't just reacting. He's protecting himself. And the question hanging in the apartment's quiet is sharper than any threat. If this fight continues, who will pay the price first? The man who controls everything, or the man who finally refused to bow?
James và Diệp bị dồn vào thế bí khi tài khoản bị xem xét, hợp đồng bị hủy và Nhi đứng trước nguy cơ mất quyền đến trường. Trong lúc tưởng như không còn lối thoát, James âm thầm lần theo dấu vết phát hiện một tài liệu nội bộ chỉ có chữ ký của Mr. Juan, kèm ghi chú thực hiện ngoài quy trình. Đây là bằng chứng cho thấy ông đã can thiệp trái phép. James không kiện ngay mà gửi cho cha một email duy nhất. Anh đã bắt đầu tự bảo vệ mình. Phản ứng đến lập tức, tài khoản được mở lại nhưng hợp đồng bị xóa sổ. Thế cân bằng quyền lực bắt đầu thay đổi. James thừa nhận nỗi sợ, nhưng quyết đứng lên để Nhi không còn là con tin. Cuộc đối đầu không còn một chiều và câu hỏi lớn được đặt ra: ai sẽ là người phải trả giá trước?